This is impossible! Staff Sergeant Blake Thompson's voice cracked with 4 hours of mounting frustration across Range 300 at Fort Benning. The 30-year-old Army sniper instructor stood behind his spotting scope, staring at the steel target 1,000 meters downrange that had defeated every attempt his elite students could devise. The Georgia heat shimmered off the concrete, creating mirage patterns that danced between the firing line and the distant target. For 4 hours, the 75th Ranger Regiment's most promising snipers had taken turns with their precision M2010 enhanced sniper rifles, each confident they could nail the challenging zero confirmation. The target remained untouched, mocking their modern equipment and years of intensive training. Sergeant First Class Rodriguez lowered his rifle with visible frustration, the 27-year-old sniper's face flushed with embarrassment. Staff Sergeant, I burned through 60 rounds of M118 LR. Ballistic computer shows perfect conditions, but every shot's going low and left. Check scope mounting, torque specs, everything. The other soldiers nodded grimly, their expensive equipment scattered around like remnants of a failed siege. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were graduates of the U.S. Army Sniper School, men trained to thread needles at distances that would make civilian shooters weep. Harold Hank Morrison had been watching the Rangers' futile efforts from his position near the range maintenance shed. At 78 years old, he looked exactly like his identification claimed, a civilian contractor responsible for range equipment maintenance. His weathered hands, stained with decades of gun oil and metal polish, gripped a worn red toolbox containing basic gunsmith tools. He wore his usual faded red work shirt that had survived more wash cycles than most soldiers had deployments, blue jeans with permanent grease stains, and worn steel-toed boots. His gray beard was neatly trimmed, and his pale blue eyes held the quiet intelligence of someone who had spent a lifetime making precision instruments work properly. Morrison had been employed at Fort Benning for 15 years, maintaining the ranges that trained America's finest marksmen. He was invisible to most soldiers, just another aging contractor keeping equipment functional and facilities clean. The Army personnel had barely acknowledged his presence during their 4-hour battle, treating him with casual dismissal that young warriors often showed elderly civilians who worked around military installations. Staff Sergeant Thompson finally noticed the old man standing nearby with his toolbox. "Sir, this is a restricted training area. You need to clear the range until we complete this exercise." Morrison nodded politely, but made no move to leave. "Just watching, son. That's quite a challenge you're facing out there." His voice carried calm authority that seemed out of place from a maintenance worker. Thompson's patience was wearing thin after hours of failure and pressure from battalion leadership. "Sir, I need you to move to a safe distance. We're conducting advanced marksmanship training with classified equipment." Morrison looked at the distant target, then at the scattered rifles and computers, then back at the frustrated soldiers. "Wind's not your only problem," Morrison said quietly, almost to himself. "That mirage is lying to you. See how it's boiling straight up at 800, then running left at the target. Your bullets are riding 2 different rivers." Several soldiers paused their equipment checks, surprised by the old man's specific observation. Sergeant Rodriguez bristled with irritation. "Thanks for the weather report, old man. We're using Kestrel wind meters and ballistic computers, not guesswork." Morrison smiled with patient understanding. "Son, all the computers in the world won't help if you're not reading what the air is actually doing. That thermal inversion at 800 meters is creating a wind shear that your Kestrel can't measure from here." Staff Sergeant Martinez looked up from his ballistic computer with skepticism. "How would you know about atmospheric conditions and external ballistics?" Morrison's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. The slight slouch of an elderly maintenance worker straightened into something that looked suspiciously like military bearing. "I've worked with similar systems before, son. Different conflicts, different ranges, but same basic principles of reading what the environment is telling you." Morrison's mind suddenly drifted to another time, another place entirely. The Georgia range faded away, replaced by the arid mountains and constant danger of Afghanistan. He wasn't 78 anymore. He was 35, a master sergeant with the 75th Ranger Regiment, operating as a sniper section leader during Operation Enduring Freedom. The year was 2003, and Morrison was part of a joint task force hunting high-value targets in the mountainous terrain along the Pakistan border, where environmental factors could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. In that harsh landscape, Morrison had been responsible for training younger Rangers in the art of precision shooting under combat conditions, where mirage reading and wind estimation required skills that went beyond technology. The mountains created unpredictable thermal currents. Altitude affected ballistics in ways that computers couldn't always calculate. And target engagement required reading environmental signs that no electronic device could measure. Morrison remembered one particular engagement where his team had spent 6 hours trying to eliminate a Taliban commander at 1,200 meters, missing repeatedly despite perfect equipment and ideal conditions according to their instruments. The breakthrough came when Morrison realized they were reading surface wind instead of the actual air currents affecting their bullets. By observing mirage patterns and thermal effects that their equipment couldn't detect, Morrison had made the shot that eliminated a key enemy leader and saved American lives. That experience taught him that precision shooting was as much about reading the invisible environment as it was about operating sophisticated equipment. Back on the Georgia range, Morrison's eyes slowly refocused on the young soldiers surrounding him. "The thing about long-range shooting," Morrison said quietly, his voice carrying authority that made nearby personnel stop their activities, "is that you're not just fighting distance and wind, you're fighting assumptions. Your instruments are telling you what's happening at your position, but your bullet has to travel through 1,000 meters of air that's doing different things at different altitudes." Thompson felt his authority being challenged by an elderly maintenance worker in front of his students. "Sir, this is Army Ranger sniper training conducted by certified instructors using the most advanced equipment available. I'm going to need you to clear the area immediately." Morrison walked back to his maintenance shed and returned, carrying what appeared to be a museum piece. The rifle was a Vietnam-era M21 sniper system, its walnut stock showing decades of careful maintenance despite its obvious age. The scope was an older Leatherwood RT that looked primitive compared to the soldier's modern optics. But everything about the weapon suggested meticulous care and professional attention. Thompson stared at the ancient rifle with disbelief. "Sir, that rifle is completely obsolete. You can't seriously expect to hit anything at 1,000 meters with equipment from the Stone Age." Morrison checked the rifle's action with movements so practiced they seemed automatic. "This rifle and I have considerable history together, Staff Sergeant. She's accounted for more confirmed targets than most modern systems ever will." Sergeant Rodriguez studied the old rifle with professional interest. Despite its age, every component appeared perfectly maintained and properly adjusted. The weapon showed obvious signs of heavy use, but was clearly functional and meticulously cared for. "Your scope bases are walking," Morrison said, examining Rodriguez's M2010. "Torque specs call for 65 inch-pounds on the base, 50 on the rings. Sounds like yours are running light." He tapped the scope mount with a fingernail. The dull sound confirmed loose hardware. "And your parallax is set for yesterday's range session. Focus your reticle first, then dial parallax until the crosshair stops swimming when you move your head." The confrontation had reached what appeared to be an absolute stalemate when Specialist Martinez made a decision that would fundamentally change everything. "Staff Sergeant," Martinez said carefully to Thompson, "what if I contact range control, just to verify his credentials and maybe get some background information?" Thompson nodded curtly, thinking this would finally resolve the situation and prove the old man was just a confused civilian contractor. Martinez walked toward communications equipment, but instead of calling range control immediately, he decided to contact Sergeant Major Williams at battalion headquarters first. Williams had been at Fort Benning longer than anyone Martinez knew and would definitely be aware of any special circumstances involving range contractors. "Sergeant Major, this is Martinez at Range 7, he said when Williams answered. We have a developing situation with an elderly civilian contractor claiming advanced shooting expertise. Says his name is Harold Morrison, carrying what appears to be a Vietnam-era M21 sniper rifle. There was an unusually long pause on the other end of the line, so long that Martinez wondered if the connection had been lost. When Sergeant Major Williams finally spoke again, his voice carried tension Martinez had never heard before. "Martinez, did you say Harold Morrison with an M21? The silence stretched for 5 full seconds. "Sweet mother of God," Williams said, and Martinez could hear papers rustling frantically in the background. "Martinez, listen to me very carefully and do exactly what I tell you. Do not allow anyone to lay a single hand on Harold Morrison. Do you understand me completely?" Martinez felt his stomach drop into his boots. In 4 years of knowing Sergeant Major Williams, he had never heard him sound genuinely panicked about anything. Before Martinez could explain the conversation, they all heard the unmistakable sound of multiple vehicles approaching at high speed across the base. The convoy screeched to a halt near the firing line with the urgency of a national emergency response. Heavy doors slammed simultaneously, and the sound of military boots on concrete echoed across the suddenly silent range. Thompson stood frozen as senior personnel emerged from vehicles with purpose and authority that made his stomach drop. Sergeant Major Williams stepped out quickly from the lead vehicle, followed by several other senior NCOs Thompson didn't recognize. But everyone's attention immediately focused on the second vehicle, where a brigadier general was climbing out with an expression that mixed profound respect with urgent concern. Brigadier General Hayes was 54 years old and commanded the Maneuver Center of Excellence at Fort Benning, overseeing all infantry and armor training for the U.S. Army. His unexpected personal arrival at a routine sniper training exercise was unprecedented, causing every soldier on the range to snap to rigid attention. General Hayes walked directly toward Morrison, completely ignoring Thompson and the other soldiers as if they were invisible obstacles. When General Hayes reached Morrison's position, something remarkable happened. The general came to rigid attention and rendered the sharpest, most precise salute that anyone present had ever witnessed in their entire military careers. "Command Sergeant Major Harold Morrison, United States Army Rangers, retired," General Hayes said, his voice booming across the suddenly silent range with authority that made every person present freeze in place. "Sir, on behalf of the United States Army, I apologize for the inexcusable disrespect shown to you here today." Morrison slowly returned the salute from his shooting position, movement still precise despite his age. "General, no apology necessary. These soldiers were conducting legitimate training and following established procedures." The general held his salute for 5 full seconds before dropping his hand with military precision. Thompson felt his knees go weak as reality crashed over him like a cold wave. Command Sergeant Major was the highest enlisted rank in the Army, reserved for soldiers with decades of exceptional service and proven leadership under the most demanding conditions. General Hayes turned to address the stunned soldiers and range personnel who had gathered to witness the unprecedented scene. "Soldiers, allow me to introduce Command Sergeant Major Harold Deadeye Morrison. He holds the Army record for longest confirmed sniper kill at 1,374 meters, set in Afghanistan in 2003. He is also a recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, and 4 Bronze Star medals." The soldiers stood frozen as the implications sank in. They had been dismissing a living legend, a soldier whose marksmanship record was literally taught in their sniper schools. General Hayes continued, his voice growing more respectful as he looked at Morrison with obvious admiration. "Command Sergeant Major Morrison's techniques for environmental assessment and mirage reading are still incorporated into advanced sniper training curriculum at every level. His ability to identify and compensate for atmospheric conditions that electronic systems miss has never been equaled in Army history." Morrison shifted uncomfortably behind his rifle, clearly uncomfortable with the public praise he had never sought during his years of quiet service.
General, these young soldiers just need to understand that precision shooting is about reading the entire environment, not just trusting what the computers tell you.
General Hayes nodded knowingly. Command Sergeant Major, would you be willing to demonstrate for these soldiers? I think they could benefit from seeing real environmental assessment techniques in action. Morrison settled more firmly behind his ancient M21, his weathered hands finding familiar positions on the worn stock. I'd be happy to help, General. Morrison's breathing slowed to the steady rhythm that preceded his most difficult shots. His eye found the scope's reticle, and decades of experience took over. Your mirage is telling you everything you need to know, Morrison said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of absolute knowledge. See that boil at 800 meters running straight up? That's where your bullet starts getting pushed. Then watch the shimmer at 900. It's running left to right at about 2 knots. Your kestrel reads surface wind, but your bullet's flying through 3 different air masses. He made precise adjustments to his ancient leatherwood scope, movements so practiced they seemed automatic. The soldiers watched in fascination as Morrison demonstrated techniques their computers had never calculated. Morrison's world narrowed to the crosshairs in his scope and the steel target shimmering in the distance. His finger found the trigger and applied first-stage pressure, taking up slack in the mechanism. His pulse slowed, his breathing nearly stopped, and his entire being focused on the moment when all variables would align perfectly. Wind shifting, thermals dying, now. The shot, when it came, cracked across the range like thunder. The sound echoed off the distant hills as the .308 Winchester round began its journey toward the target that had defeated the Army's best efforts. 2 seconds later, the unmistakable ring of copper-jacketed lead striking hardened steel floated back across the range. Perfect center hit. The steel target sang with the impact, a sound that every soldier present would remember for the rest of their careers. Morrison worked the bolt smoothly, ejecting the spent case, and slowly rose from his shooting position. The ancient rifle had performed exactly as he knew it would, delivering precision that modern equipment had failed to achieve despite perfect conditions according to their instruments. Thompson stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper as the full weight of his disrespect became clear. Command Sergeant Major Morrison, I was completely out of line. I apologize for my disrespect and failure to recognize your expertise and service. Morrison gave him a tired but genuine smile that held no trace of anger or resentment. Son, you were protecting your soldiers and maintaining training standards. That's exactly what a good instructor should do. The system failed you by not properly briefing you on my background and capabilities. General Hayes reached into his briefcase and withdrew a small wooden presentation box. Command Sergeant Major Morrison, this belongs to you. It was lost in the Pentagon mail system for 20 years and finally found its way to my desk last month. He opened the box, revealing the Distinguished Service Cross, one of the Army's highest decorations for extraordinary heroism. As Morrison prepared to return to his maintenance duties, now wearing the Distinguished Service Cross on his work shirt, Thompson finally understood that true marksmanship was about understanding fundamental principles rather than relying solely on sophisticated technology. The greatest snipers read the environment like a book written in wind and light.